A little girl was sold to a mountain man as punishment by her father, but he had shocking plans. In the biting wind of a frontier winter, a drunken gambler drags his tiny daughter into the street, offering her to the highest bidder. Boots crunch in the snow. A towering mountain man steps forward and puts a silver dollar in the man's hand. But instead of leading her to a life of labor, he takes her into the high country, to a lonely cabin, a warm fire, and a promise. What the town thinks is madness is only the beginning, because powerful men want the girl back, not out of love, but for something she carries without knowing it. With the law, a blizzard, and her father closing in this mountain, man must choose between the rules of the land and the vow he made to God. Will his shocking plans save her or destroy them both before spring thaw? Before we begin, send a quick wave in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your vibe. It's amazing how stories like this echo across the world. The bitter mountain wind howled through Pine Gulch's empty streets, rattling shutters and sending stray papers tumbling across the frozen dirt. Most folks had sense enough to stay indoors on such a day, huddled close to their hearths and stoves. But outside the Lucky A Saloon, a crowd gathered, drawn by sounds of struggle and a child's frightened whimpers. Rufus stumbled onto the wooden porch, his bloodshot eyes wild with drink and desperation. His calloused hand gripped the arm of a small girl bundled in a threadbare coat. Clara's face was streaked with tears, her brown curls tangled by the wind as she tried to keep her footing on the icy boards. Ain't worth the trouble to feed her, Rufus bellowed, swaying as he held his daughter out like unwanted goods at market. $1 silver takes her. Any takers? His words slurred together, heavy with whiskey and bitterness. The gathering crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some laughed nervously, thinking it must be some cruel joke. Others whispered in horror, mothers pulling their own children closer. Through the steam of their breath in the frigid air, they watched the scene unfold, unable or unwilling to intervene. "Come now, Rufus," someone called out. "You don't mean that." "Like hell I don't." He shook Clara's arm, making her cry out. $1. That's all I'm asking." From the edge of the crowd, a tall figure emerged. Elias Kane's worn buffalo coat swept behind him as he approached the porch, his face shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat. Snow crunched beneath his boots with each deliberate step. The townsfolk parted before him, falling silent as they recognized the solitary mountain man who rarely ventured into their midst. Without a word, Elias reached into his coat pocket. The silver dollar caught the weak winter sunlight as he held it out. Rufus's eyes gleamed with greed and triumph as he snatched the coin. Clara stood trembling, her small hand reaching up instinctively toward the stranger who now owned her. Elias's weathered fingers engulfed her tiny ones with surprising gentleness. In one fluid motion, he lifted her onto his hip, wrapping his coat around her shivering form. Sheriff Yates pushed through the crowd, his badge glinting. "Now hold on. There, Kane. What do you mean to do with that child?" Elias didn't answer. His boots thudded heavily on the wooden steps as he descended, Clara tucked securely against him. The crowd parted again, this time with a different kind of silence, one filled with uncertainty and something like hope. The sheriff called out again, but Elias continued walking, his long strides carrying them toward the snow-covered trail that led into the mountains. Clara's small face peeked over his shoulder, her eyes wide but no longer afraid as the town grew smaller behind them. The trek to Elias's cabin was long, but he sheltered Clara from the worst of the wind with his coat. As darkness fell, the little house came into view, a warm light glowing from its single window. Inside, the fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Elias settled Clara on a bench near the fire, unwrapping her from her thin coat. Her cheeks were red from the cold, but color was returning to them in the cabin's warmth. Moving with quiet efficiency, he heated some broth in a tin pot over the fire. "Here now," he said softly, offering her a cup of the steaming liquid. It was the first words he'd spoken since taking her from the saloon. Clara's small hands wrapped around the warm cup, and she sipped carefully, watching him with solemn eyes. After she had finished the broth, Elias found an old quilt and made her a bed near the hearth. Clara curled up without protest, exhaustion evident in her drooping eyes. Within moments, her breathing deepened into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. Elias settled into his chair by the fire, watching the flames dance. The weight of what he'd done settled over him like a heavy blanket. He clasped his hands together, bowing his head in the firelight. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "thank you for leading me to her. Help me keep her safe." He paused, remembering another prayer spoken years ago over another small form. "I promise to do right by her, to give her the home she deserves." Outside, the wind continued to howl through the pines, but inside the cabin, Clara slept soundly, for perhaps the first time in months. Elias kept his vigil by the fire, his prayer of gratitude and promise echoing in the quiet night. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows, casting a gentle glow across Clara's sleeping form. Elias had moved her to his bed during the night, tucking the patchwork quilt around her small shoulders. Now, as dawn painted the cabin in soft colors, he watched her stir beneath the warm covers. Clara's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her features for a moment before recognition dawned. She sat up slowly, clutching the quilt to her chest, her gaze darting around the unfamiliar room. "Good morning, little one," Elias said softly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, her brown curls tumbling around her face. The fear from yesterday had faded, replaced by cautious curiosity. "Hungry?" he asked, gesturing to the pot of porridge warming on the stove. Another small nod. "Well then, let's get you dressed and fed. Got some friends outside who need meeting." 2. He'd found an old shirt of his that would serve as a dress for her until he could get proper clothes from town. Clara allowed him to help her dress, her tiny fingers working the buttons while he held the fabric steady. The morning air but sharp and clean as they stepped outside. Clara stayed close to his leg, her eyes wide as she took in the snow-covered yard and the mountains rising beyond. Chicken tracks dotted the fresh snow near the coop, and somewhere in the distance, a jay called. "These here are the hens," Elias explained, opening the coop door. Warm, feathered bodies clucked and shuffled. As they emerged, "They give us eggs if we treat them kind." He showed Clara how to scatter feed, a delight evident as the chickens pecked around her feet at the water trough. Elias demonstrated how to break the morning ice with a stick. Clara watched intently, then tried herself, giggling as the frozen surface cracked beneath her careful strikes. "And this old fellow," Elias said, leading her to the small barn, "is Samson." The elderly mule lifted his head, ears pricked forward at their approach. "He's gentle as they come." Clara reached out hesitantly, her small hand disappearing into Samson's thick winter coat. The mule lowered his head, breathing softly as she stroked his nose. Back inside, Elias served up bowls of porridge sweetened with the last of his honey. As they ate, he chose his words carefully. "Clara," he began, waiting until she looked up at him, "I want you to know something important. You're safe here with me. Nobody's going to hurt you or sell you or make you afraid again. Do you understand?" She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The morning passed peacefully until hoofbeats approached the cabin. Sheriff Yates dismounted in the yard, his expression troubled as he knocked on the door. "Kane," he said, removing his hat as he stepped inside. His eyes found Clara by the fire, where she was watching them warily. "We need to talk about yesterday." "Nothing to talk about, Sheriff," Elias replied quietly. She's here. She's safe. You can't just buy a child, Kane. It ain't legal, no matter what her father said. Wasn't buying her as property. Elias's voice remained calm but firm. Was saving her from harm. She's my responsibility now, not my servant. Lord put her in my path for a reason. Sheriff Yates sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. And what reason might that be? Elias was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to the small wooden cross hanging on the wall. Lost my Sarah and our baby girl to fever 5 years back, he said finally. I ain't been asking God why ever since. Yesterday, watching that man treat his child like worthless goods, I knew. Some things happen so we can help others who need us. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll be checking in, he said finally, replacing his hat. Make sure she's cared for proper. Wouldn't expect any less, Elias replied. After the sheriff rode away, Elias sat in his chair by the fire, memories of Sarah washing over him. She would have known just how to comfort a frightened child, how to bring out Clara's smile. He watched the little girl exploring the cabin's corners, touching things with gentle curiosity, and made a silent promise to his late wife. No harm would come to this child. Not while he drew breath. As the afternoon waned, Elias took out his whittling knife and a piece of pine. Clara watched, fascinated, as he shaped it into a simple doll. Her eyes lit up when he presented it to her, small fingers tracing the smooth features. Evening settled over the mountain, bringing heavy snow that drifted against the windows. Clara curled up in Elias's armchair, her new doll clutched tight against her chest. As her eyes drooped closed, Elias covered her with a blanket, his heart full of a feeling he hadn't known in years. Hope. 2 days passed in peaceful routine, Clara growing more comfortable with each sunrise. But on the third morning, heavy knocking rattled the cabin door, startling them both during breakfast. Clara dropped her spoon, eyes wide with sudden fear. Stay here, little one, Elias said softly, rising from the table. The pounding came again, more insistent. Outside stood 3 men on horseback, their mounts stamping in the fresh snow. The one in front wore a crisp black coat and carried an official-looking document. 2 deputies flanked him, their badges catching. The winter sun, Mr. Kane? The man in black dismounted, his polished boots crunching in the snow. I'm Federal Indian Agent Chalmers. I have here a court order regarding the child known as Clara. Elias's heart tightened, but he kept his voice steady. What sort of order? One declaring you have no legal claim to the girl. Chalmers extended the paper, his tone clipped and formal. She is to be placed in the orphanage in Pueblo, where she received proper care and education. Through the cabin window, Elias could see Clara watching, her small face pale with worry. She's only just starting to feel safe, he said, turning back to Chalmers. Moving her now would be cruel. The law is clear, Mr. Kane. You cannot simply purchase a child, regardless of the circumstances. Chalmers straightened his coat. However, you have 1 week to appear before Judge Harlan in Pine Gulch to plead your case. After that, the deputies will return to escort the child to Pueblo. The men rode away, leaving Elias standing in the yard, the court order crumpling in his tight grip. Inside, Clara hadn't moved from her spot at the table, her breakfast growing cold. That evening, as they sat down to their simple supper of beans and cornbread, Elias bowed his head. Lord, he prayed, his voice rough with emotion, grant me wisdom to protect this child you've placed in my care. Show me the path through this valley and give me strength to walk it. Amen. Clara watched him carefully, sensing his troubled spirit. She pushed her plate closer to his, offering a piece of her cornbread. The gesture nearly brought tears to his eyes. Morning brought heavy clouds and the threat of snow, but Elias knew they couldn't wait. He hitched Samson to the wooden sled and wrapped Clara in every blanket he could spare. "We're going to town," he explained as he settled her in the sled. "There's someone special I want you to meet." The journey to Pine Gulch took twice as long. In the winter conditions, Clara huddled against him as the sled runners cut through the snow, her trust evident in the way she leaned into his warmth. Mary Two Rivers lived in a neat cabin on the edge of town, where she tended to both settler and native women in need. Smoke curled from her chimney as Elias helped Clara down from the sled. The door opened before they reached it. "I wondered when you bring her," Mary said, her dark eyes kind as she looked at Clara. She wore a warm wool dress with traditional Cheyenne beadwork at the collar, her long black hair braided neatly. "Come in, both of you. The fire's warm." Inside, Mary knelt to Clara's level, speaking softly. "Hello, little one. I'm Mary. Would you let me look at you? Make sure you're healthy?" Clara glanced up at Elias, who nodded encouragingly. Mary's examination was gentle and thorough, her experienced hands checking for signs of illness or injury. "She's undernourished," Mary reported, "but otherwise healthy. She needs regular meals and plenty of rest." She turned to Elias. "Do you know how to prepare food for a child her age?" Elias shook his head. "Been doing my best, but I reckon I could use some guidance." "I'll help you learn," Mary promised. She went to her cupboard and began gathering supplies, explaining which foods would help Clara grow strong, how to prepare them, and when to serve meals. The afternoon light was fading as they prepared to leave. Mary pressed a jar of honey and a bundle of dried herbs into Elias's hands. "For tea," she explained. "It will help her sleep." On the slow ride home, Clara snuggled closer as the wind picked up. Elias tucked the blankets tighter around her. "Clara," he said gently, choosing simple words she could understand. "Some people think you shouldn't stay with me. They want to send you away to a place with other children." She stiffened against him, her small fingers clutching his coat. "But I want you to know something important," he continued. "I'm going to fight for you. I promise to keep you safe, and I mean to keep that promise." They reached the cabin as dusk settled over the mountains. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, heavy with unshed snow. Clara helped him unhitch Samson, her movements more confident now around the gentle mule. Inside, as Elias lit the lamps, the first flakes began to fall. That night, the mountain winds rose to a howl, driving thick snow against the cabin walls. Clara startled at a particularly loud gust, her spoon clattering against her empty breakfast bowl. "Just the wind having itself a dance," Elias said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "We'll stay warm inside today." The blizzard sealed them in their own quiet world. Elias showed Clara how to stack kindling near the fireplace, her small hands arranging the thin sticks carefully. "Like this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's right," he nodded, pleased to hear her speak. "Nice and neat so it catches quick." At the cooking pot, he lifted her onto a wooden crate so she could reach the spoon. "Stir slow and steady," he instructed, guiding her hand through the thick venison stew. The savory steam rose between them, carrying the scent of carrots and potatoes. They passed the afternoon with simple games. Elias taught her to play pickup sticks with spare kindling, and she proved surprisingly deft at sliding the pieces free without disturbing the others. Her shy questions began to flow more freely as the hours passed. "Did you always live in the mountains?" she asked, concentrating on a particularly tricky stick. "Most of my years," he replied. "The high country gets in your blood." As evening approached, and the storm continued its assault, they sat close to the fire. Clara curled in his old armchair, wrapped in a wool blanket, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Would you like to hear about the time I tracked a silver fox through these mountains?" Elias asked, settling into his storytelling voice. He told her about following the clever creature's tracks through deep snow, only to find it had doubled back behind him. His impression of the surprised fox complete with exaggerated gestures, drew out her first real laugh, a sound that warmed the cabin better than any fire. Morning brought stillness. The storm spent at last. Fresh snow lay deep and pristine around the cabin, glittering in the pale sunlight. Elias wrapped Clara carefully in soft buffalo fur, making sure every inch was protected before settling her on the sled. The ride to Mary's home was slow but peaceful, the runners cutting smooth tracks through the new snow. Mary met them at her door with steaming cups of pine needle tea. Perfect timing, she said, leading them to her small barn. The hens need extra care in this weather. Inside, Mary showed them how to prepare warm mash for the winter-weary chickens. Clara watched intently as Mary mixed cornmeal, scraps, and hot water, her tiny nose wrinkling at the peculiar smell. Birds need warm bellies same as people, Mary explained, letting Clara scatter some of the feed. The hens clucked appreciatively, pecking at the offering. While Clara continued to feed the chickens under Mary's watchful eye, the healer drew Elias aside. Her expression grew serious. "I've heard talk about Judge Harlan," she said quietly. "He's known to favor men of means and influence. Even Rufus, when he's sober enough to appear respectable, can win his ear." Elias's jaw tightened. "Reckon I need more than just right on my side then." "You'll need a good lawyer," Mary agreed. "Someone who knows territorial law." The thought sparked a memory. Few years back, I helped a Denver lawyer when his hunting party got lost in early snow. Man named Grant, Harlan Grant, pulled him out before the cold could take him. Elias stroked his beard thoughtfully. Might be time to send him a telegram. They left Mary's as the sky began to clear, Clara drowsy from the morning's activities. She nestled against Elias's chest as they rode home, her breathing deep and even despite the sled's gentle motion. That evening, after Clara had gone to sleep, Elias sat by lamplight with his carving knife and a piece of pine wood. His hands moved with careful precision, shaping the wood into the form of a small horse. He worked until every detail was just right. The flowing mane, the lifted hoof, the alert ears. Moving quietly, he placed the finished carving on Clara's bed, tucking it carefully beneath her small hand. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake, a peaceful smile touching her lips. "Sleep well, little one," he whispered, then returned to his chair by the fire to plan tomorrow's ride into town. The telegram to Harlan Grant couldn't wait, not with the hearing drawing closer each day. But for now, in the quiet of the cabin, Elias let himself enjoy the simple blessing of Clara's peaceful breathing and the knowledge that, at least for this moment, she was safe and content. The morning sun cast long shadows across fresh snow, but the air held a biting chill that made even Samson's breath steam in thick clouds. Elias pulled his collar higher against the wind as he swung his axe, splitting wood with practiced strokes. The pile grew steadily beside the cabin, while Clara watched from the doorway, bundled in her warmest clothes. "Best stock up," Elias explained, setting another log on the chopping block. "Town's waiting, and we don't want to come home to cold hearth." Once he'd stacked enough wood to last several days, Elias hitched Samson to the small wagon. He lifted Clara onto the seat, tucking warm blankets around her before climbing up himself. The mule's hooves crunched through the crusty snow as they started down the mountain trail. The telegraph office sat at the far end of Pine Gulch's main street. As they made their way past the general store and post office, Elias noticed the sideways glances and hushed conversations that followed their progress. Two women outside the millinery stopped their conversation to stare openly. "Ain't natural, I'm keeping that child," one whispered, not quite quiet enough. "Mountain land like that, living alone, ... The other added, shaking her head. Elias kept his eyes forward, guiding Samson through the rutted street. Clara pressed closer to his side, sensing the tension in the air. Inside the telegraph office, the operator's eyebrows rose as Elias dictated his message to Harlan Grant in Denver. The tap of the telegraph key seemed unusually loud in the small space. As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, a familiar voice cut through the morning air. "Well, if it ain't the righteous mountain man himself." Rufus stood at the corner, and Elias barely recognized him. Gone were the whiskey-stained clothes and unwashed beard. He wore a clean suit, his hair neatly combed, though his eyes still held that calculating gleam. "Found my way back to the Lord," Rufus announced, loud enough for passers-by to hear. "Been doing some thinking about my little girl." He took a step closer, and Clara shrank against Elias's leg. "Surely a God-fearing man like yourself wouldn't keep a father from his own child." Elias placed a protective hand on Clara's shoulder. "Seems to me you gave up that right for a silver dollar," he said quietly. "Best you move along now." "I got rights," Rufus insisted, his practiced smile slipping. "She's my flesh and blood." "She's scared and staying put," Elias replied firmly. He lifted Clara into his arms and turned away, ignoring Rufus's continued protests. The sun had passed its peak when they reached Mary's house. The smell of fresh bread welcomed them inside, where Mary had laid out a simple lunch of bean soup and cornbread. "Eat up," she encouraged Clara, ladling out a full bowl. "Good food makes strong spirits." While Clara ate, Mary disappeared into her back room. She returned with something small wrapped in soft leather. "A gift for you, little one," she said, unfolding the leather to reveal a delicate beaded bracelet. The tiny blue and white beads caught the light as Mary fastened it around Clara's wrist. "For protection," she explained, touching each of the special patterns. "These beads carry prayers for safety and peace." Clara's eyes widened with wonder as she turned her wrist, watching the beads shimmer. "Thank you," she whispered, the words clear and sweet. The afternoon was fading toward dusk when they finally turned Samson toward home. The temperature dropped sharply as shadows lengthened across the snow. Elias spotted the paper tacked to their cabin door from several yards away, his heart quickening as he recognized the Denver law office letterhead. After settling Clara and Samson in the barn, he read the note by the last rays of sunlight. Harlan Grant would arrive by rail in 3 days' time. The Lauer remembered well the mountain rescue and promised his full attention to the case. Hope stirred in Elias's chest as he tucked the letter into his coat pocket. In the barn, Clara had climbed onto an overturned bucket, proudly holding out a carrot for Samson. The old mule's lips tickled her palm as he accepted the treat, making her giggle with delight. "Gentle now," Elias cautioned, but he couldn't help smiling at her joy. Later, as lamplight filled the cabin with warm shadows, Elias bowed his head in silent prayer. He asked for strength for the days ahead, wisdom to protect Clara, and guidance. Through the storm, he could feel gathering. But mostly, he gave thanks for the small miracle of her laughter and the chance to keep her safe. The Pine Gulch Hotel's lobby felt warm after the cold mountain air. Elias brushed snow from his coat, while Clara peered around his legs at the fancy wallpaper and polished wooden counter. A tall man in a well-cut suit rose from one of the leather chairs, his keen eyes taking in both father and daughter. "Mr. Kane." Harlan Grant extended his hand. "Good to see you again, though under different circumstances than our last mountain encounter." Elias shook the lawyer's hand firmly. "Much obliged for coming, Mr. Grant." They settled in a quiet corner of the hotel's small dining room. Clara sat close to Elias, coloring with a pencil and paper Grant had thoughtfully provided while the men talked. "I've reviewed the initial documents," Grant said, spreading several papers on the table. "Rufus has quite a history in these parts. Unpaid debts, drunk and disorderly charges, gambling losses." He tapped one particular document. Even attempted claim jumping last spring. Elias nodded. Man's not fit to raise a child. Agreed. But courts can be particular about these matters. Grant leaned forward, lowering his voice. Your mountain, cabin, your lifestyle, while honorable, might be seen as unconventional for raising a young girl. She's safe, well-fed, learning her letters from Mary Two Rivers. The Cheyenne midwife? Grant's eyebrows rose. That's actually helpful. Shows you're ensuring proper female guidance. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But the judge might feel more confident if there were a more permanent feminine presence in the home. Elias's expression remained neutral, but his shoulders tensed slightly. You're suggesting marriage. It would strengthen our position considerably. Grant glanced at Clara, who was completely absorbed in her drawing. A proper family unit, with both mother and father, tends to carry weight with the territorial courts. The conversation stayed with Elias as they walked through the afternoon snow to Mary's house. The warm scent of sage greeted them as they entered. Reverend Cole was already there, having tea with Mary at her kitchen table. Clara immediately spotted Mary's orange tabby cat sunning itself by the window. She hurried over, giggling as the cat stretched and rolled onto its back for attention. How was the meeting? Mary asked, pouring fresh tea for Elias. Elias shared Grant's assessment while the Reverend listened thoughtfully. When he mentioned the marriage suggestion, a heavy silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by Clara's delighted laughter as she played with the cat. I could perform the ceremony, Reverend Cole offered quietly, if you both were willing. His eyes moved between Elias and Mary. It would be legal and binding, recognized by any court in the territory. Mary's hands tightened around her teacup. And would it be real? She asked, her voice carrying years of careful dignity. Or would I be just a convenient solution? A way to make white men's courts more comfortable? Elias met her steady gaze. You're no one's convenience, Mary. Never have been. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his respect. Then let us not rush into such things for legal purposes alone. Her tone was gentle but firm. Marriage should come from the heart, not necessity. The cat chose that moment to leap into Clara's lap, making her squeal with joy. The sound broke the tension, drawing smiles from all the adults. As dusk approached, Elias and Clara prepared for the ride home. The sky had cleared, revealing a blanket of bright stars above the mountain peaks. Clara sat securely in front of Elias on Samson, her small body gradually relaxing against his chest as they climbed the familiar trail. Look there. Elias pointed to a particularly bright star. That one helps travelers find their way home. Clara's only response was steady breathing. She had fallen asleep, completely trusting in his care. Elias adjusted the blanket around her, marveling at how natural it felt to protect this small life. He thought about Mary's words regarding marriage and knew she was right. Some things couldn't be rushed, even for good reasons. God's timing would have to be enough. Later, in the cabin's peaceful quiet, Elias sat in his chair by the fire. Clara's coat lay across his lap as he carefully mended a tear in the sleeve. His stitches were not as fine as a woman's might be, but they were strong and sure, like his love for this child who had so quickly become part of his heart. Outside, the night wind whispered through pine boughs. Inside, the fire crackled softly, and Clara's steady breathing from her bed in the corner filled Elias with a deep sense of rightness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Dawn broke pale and sharp over Pine Gulch. Icy wind whipped between the buildings, sending loose snow dancing across the courthouse steps. Elias adjusted Clara's woolen scarf, her small hand warm in his, as they climbed toward the heavy wooden doors. Harlan Grant met them in the drafty corridor, his leather briefcase tucked under one arm. Judge Harlan has a reputation for fairness, he said quietly. "But don't expect this to be easy." The courtroom smelled of wood smoke and lamp oil. Clara pressed closer to Elias as they made their way to their seats. Sheriff Yates nodded to them. From his place near the front, and Mary Two Rivers sat dignified in her best dress, her dark eyes watchful. Judge Harlan entered, his black robe swishing as he took his seat. The room fell silent except for the constant moan of wind against the windows. "Case regarding custody of Clara Matthews," he announced, shuffling through papers on his desk. "Temporary guardianship petition filed by Elias Kane." Rufus sat on the opposite side, wearing a clean shirt and trimmed beard. His hands were steady, his face set in an expression of earnest concern that made Elias's jaw tighten. When called to testify, Rufus stood with measured grace. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear and controlled, "I've done wrong by my daughter. I admit that freely. The death of her mother sent me into a dark place." He paused, as if overcome with emotion. "But I've found my way back to the light. I haven't touched a drop in weeks. I've taken honest work at the livery stable. I can provide Clara with a proper home in town, close to school when she's of age." Elias watched the judge's face, searching for any sign of his thoughts. Clara sat quiet beside him, her small fingers working the beads on the bracelet Mary had given her. Grant rose next, calling Mary Two Rivers to testify. She spoke with quiet authority about Clara's condition when she first examined her. "The child was thin, weak from poor nutrition," she explained. "Now she has healthy color in her cheeks. Her eyes are bright. She laughs freely. These are signs of a child who feels safe and cared for." Sheriff Yates provided his testimony next, detailing the numerous times he'd found Rufus drunk in alleys or causing disturbances. "Just last month, before all this started, I had to lock him up overnight for fighting at the Lucky Ace," he stated firmly. "Found Clara alone in their room at the boarding house, no food in sight." Grant presented documents showing Rufus's unpaid debts and court citations. The morning stretched on, the wind growing fiercer outside. Clara dozed against Elias's arm while the adults argued about her future. Finally, Judge Harlan cleared his throat. "This court takes the welfare of children very seriously," he began. "While Mr. Matthews shows signs of improvement, his pattern of behavior cannot be ignored." He turned his stern gaze to Elias. "Mr. Kane's situation is unconventional, but reports from respected members of this community speak to his character and commitment to the child's well-being." The judge lifted his gavel. "I hereby grant temporary custody to Elias Kane, pending further investigation into both parties' circumstances." Court dismissed. Rufus's face darkened as he stood. His carefully maintained composure cracked, showing something ugly beneath. He shouldered past Elias on his way out of the courtroom, muttering just loud enough to hear, "The law won't save you forever." Grant squeezed Elias's shoulder. "We'll keep building our case. This is just the first step." The ride home was quiet. Clara bundled warm against Elias's chest as Samson picked his way up the snowy trail. Relief mingled with unease in Elias's heart. He had won this round, but Rufus's threat echoed in his mind. Evening settled soft around the cabin. Elias prepared a simple celebration supper of cornbread and beans, adding an extra pat of butter to Clara's portion. She sat in her usual spot, legs swinging beneath her chair, carefully breaking her cornbread into bite-sized pieces. "We get to stay together?" she asked suddenly, looking up at him with serious eyes. "That's right," Elias answered. "For as long as I can make it so." Clara nodded, satisfied. She finished her beans, then carried her plate to the wash basin like he'd taught her. As he helped her into her nightgown later, she wrapped her small arms around his neck. "Night, Pa," she whispered, the word falling as natural as snowflakes. Elias's throat tightened. He held her close for a moment, unable to speak. then tucked her into bed with gentle hands. She was asleep almost instantly, her face peaceful in the fading firelight. He sat in his chair by the hearth, listening to the wind's lonely song through the pines. The fire burned lower, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Clara's steady breathing mixed with the crack of settling logs, familiar sounds of home that somehow made the cabin feel both safer and more precious than ever before. The mountain winter settled into a gentle rhythm over the next 2 weeks. Each morning, Clara helped Elias break ice in the water trough, her small boots crunching in the snow beside his larger ones. She learned to scatter corn for the chickens without scaring them, giggling when they pecked around her feet. Inside, she stood on a wooden crate to help dry dishes, carefully stacking them just as Elias showed her. The cabin grew warmer with her presence. Where silence had once filled the spaces between the log walls, now Clara's soft humming accompanied the crackle of the fire. She arranged her few toys, the whittled horse, a rag doll from Mary, and smooth stones she'd collected on a shelf Elias had built just for her. One crisp morning after fresh snow, Elias pulled out an old wooden sled he'd stored in the barn. Clara's eyes lit up at the sight. He wrapped her in an extra wool scarf, and they trudged to the gentle slope behind the cabin. The first run down, Clara held tight to his chest, squealing with delight as they glided over the powder. By the third time, she was begging to try it alone. "I'll walk beside you," Elias promised. Positioning the sled at the top of the hill, Clara gripped the rope handles, her face determined. As they slid down, her laughter rang through the pines, pure joy echoing off the snow-laden branches. Even the chickens stopped pecking to watch their passes. Their visits to Mary's became part of their routine, twice each week when weather allowed. The Cheyenne woman taught Clara to string beads while Elias helped repair her roof or chop wood. Sometimes Mary would tell stories of her people, her voice soft and musical. While Clara sat entranced, Elias found himself watching Mary more often, the gentle way she braided Clara's hair, how she moved with quiet grace through her herb garden, the strength in her hands as she kneaded bread. He began to imagine what it might be like, the three of them together, a real family. But he kept these thoughts to himself, not wanting to pressure Mary or confuse Clara. One morning, as Elias split wood behind the cabin, he heard hoofbeats approaching. The mail carrier, bundled against the cold, handed him a thick envelope bearing the territorial court seal. Elias's heart thumped heavily as he read the formal document inside. The final custody hearing was set for early spring, when the mountain passes would be clear enough for regular travel. That evening, as Clara helped set their simple supper table, Elias knew he needed to prepare her. They sat down to bowls of steaming rabbit stew, Clara carefully blowing on each spoonful just as he taught her. "Clara," he began gently, "remember when we spoke to the judge in town?" She nodded, reaching for a piece of cornbread. "The man in the black dress?" "That's right. His robe." Elias smiled. "Well, we'll need to go see him again when the snow starts melting. He wants to make sure you're happy and safe here." Clara's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Will the angry man be there?" My ... She struggled with the word. "My father? Likely so," Elias answered honestly. "But you won't be alone. I'll be right beside you, and Mary too. And you just need to tell the truth about living here. Can you do that?" Clara considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I like it here," she said simply, "with you and the chickens and Samson." Elias felt his throat tighten. "I like having you here too, little one." After supper, Clara helped wash the dishes, then changed into her nightgown. As she climbed into her cot, Elias knelt beside her as he did each night. "Shall we say our prayers?" Clara nodded, folding her small hands like he'd shown her. Elias began the familiar words, and Clara's soft voice joined his, still uncertain but growing stronger. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep ... As they finished, a wolf's lonely howl echoed from the distant ridges. Clara's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't seem frightened. Elias tucked the quilts around her, making sure she was warm. The wolves won't come near, he assured her. They're just singing their night songs, like we sing our prayers? Clara asked sleepily. Something like that. Elias smiled. Rest now. He watched as her eyes drifted closed, her breathing becoming deep and even. Outside, another wolf answered the first, their wild song carrying across the snow-covered valley. Elias stood at the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. The wolves reminded him how quickly things could change in these mountains, how safety was never guaranteed. But for now, in this moment, Clara slept peacefully in her cot, and that was enough. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow as Elias rhythmically swung his axe. Each blow sent splinters of pine wood flying, the sharp crack echoing off the cabin walls. Clara sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a wool blanket, carefully stringing beads onto twine the way Mary had taught her. The sound of rushing hoofbeats broke through the steady chopping. Elias looked up to see Mary Two Rivers riding hard up the trail, her dark hair streaming behind her. She reined her horse to a stop, chest heaving from the hard ride. Elias, she called, dismounting quickly. Her usually calm face was tight with worry. I need to speak with you. He drove the axe into the chopping block and strode over. What's wrong? Mary glanced at Clara, then lowered her voice. Rufus has been in town all day, drunk and boasting at the lucky ace. He's telling everyone he'll win Clara back at the hearing. Elias's jaw tightened. He can try. There's more. Mary stepped closer, her breath making clouds in the cold air. Clara's mother owned land near the new Silver Strike. Good land, with water rights. Rufus wants Clara back so he can sell it to the mining company as her guardian. The truth hit Elias like a physical blow. Rufus's sudden reformation, his clean clothes at the first hearing, his persistent demands to see Clara, it had all been about money. The anger that rose in him was so fierce, he had to take a deep breath to steady himself. Clara, he called, gently. Time to go inside and wash up for supper. The little girl gathered her beads carefully and went in. Once the door closed, Elias turned back to Mary. How much is the land worth? The miners are offering $5,000. Mary's dark eyes were troubled. Rufus was bragging he'd be rich enough to move to Denver and leave Clara in an orphanage. Elias growled. The thought of Rufus using his own daughter this way made his hands curl into fists. I'll testify, Mary said firmly. I heard him myself, talking about the sale. He didn't notice me. People like Rufus rarely see Indians as people who matter. That's dangerous, Elias warned. Rufus won't take kindly to you speaking against him. Mary lifted her chin. I've faced worse than the likes of him. Clara deserves to be protected. Fresh snow began to fall as they talked, fat flakes swirling in the dying light. Inside the cabin, they could hear Clara humming as she washed her hands at the basin. Stay for supper, Elias offered. Storm's coming in. Mary nodded, and they went inside where Clara was already setting the table with 3 plates, having heard Mary's arrival. The child's simple trust, setting a place for Mary without being asked. Maybe Elias's heart ached with renewed determination to protect her. They kept the conversation light during the meal, but Elias noticed how Clara watched them, both sensitive to the undercurrent of tension. After supper, she fell asleep quickly in her cot, clutching her rag doll. Once Clara's breathing deepened into sleep, Elias and Mary sat by the fire, speaking in low voices. We need proof, Elias said, stoking the flames. Something more than overheard boasting. The mining company must have paperwork, Mary suggested. Letters to Rufus, perhaps? And there's the deed to Clara's mother's land. That would show what he stands to gain. Judge Harlan needs to see Rufus hasn't changed at all. Elias ran a hand through his hair. That this sudden interest in being a father is just greed. I'll ask around town, Mary offered. The bartender at the Lucky Ace owes me for treating his wife's fever last summer. He might know something useful. The snow fell heavier outside, blanketing the world in white silence. Mary rose, pulling on her heavy coat. I should go before the trail gets too bad. I'll walk you part way, Elias said, reaching for his buffalo coat. He checked Clara once more, tucking the quilt more securely around her shoulders, then followed. Mary outside. They walked through the swirling snow, Mary leading her horse. The only sound was the crunch of their boots and the soft nickering of the horse. At the bend in the trail where it dropped toward town, they stopped. Be careful, Elias said. Rufus is dangerous when he's drinking. Mary's smile was fierce in the gathering dark. So am I when protecting those I care about. She mounted her horse and picked up her lantern. The warm glow surrounded her like a halo as she started down the trail. Elias watched until the light faded into the snowy night, then turned back toward the cabin. Inside, he added wood to the fire and sat in his chair, listening to Clara's soft breathing and the pop of burning pine. Anger churned in his gut at the thought of Rufus using Clara like this. The man had never truly cared for his daughter, not when she was cold, not when she was hungry, not when she cried for comfort in the night. Now he only wanted her for what she was worth in silver. The January wind howled through Pine Gulch's streets as Elias guided Samson toward the general store, Clara bundled tight against his chest in the buffalo coat. Snow had drifted into deep banks along the boardwalks, and icicles hung like glass. Daggers from every eave. Almost there, little one, he murmured as Clara shivered. The mule's hooves crunched through crusty snow, steam rising from his flanks. Outside the store, Elias lifted Clara down and steadied her on the slippery boards. Inside, warmth from the pot-bellied stove wrapped around them like a blanket. While Clara admired a display of colored glass bottles, Elias gathered their supplies. Flour, coffee, sugar, lamp oil. Voices drifted through the thin wall from the lawyer's office next door. Elias recognized Rufus's raspy drawl and moved closer to listen. $300 cash, Judge Mackenzie. Rufus's voice was eager. Plus a share of the mining profits once I get the girl and sell that land. A deeper voice answered, risky business, overturning another county's custody ruling. If anyone found out, who's gonna tell? That mountain man? The Indian woman? Ain't nobody that matters gonna question a judge's decision. Elias's hand tightened on the flour sack. Judge Mackenzie was known for taking bribes in his own county. If he testified at the hearing. Pa? Clara tugged his sleeve. Can I have a peppermint stick? He forced a smile, selecting a red-striped candy. Just one, darling. While the shopkeeper wrapped their supplies, Elias's mind raced. He needed to warn Grant Dodd at the telegraph office. He sent an urgent message. Rufus bribing Judge Mackenzie Stop Lanning to testify at hearing. Stop need your help sooner, STOP. The operator promised to send it immediately. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving needle-sharp snow into their faces. Elias tucked Clara deeper into his coat for the ride home. That night, the storm raged full force. Wind screamed down the chimney and rattled the shutters like angry fists. Elias moved through the cabin, checking each window, testing the heavy wooden bar across the door. His rifle stood loaded in the corner, though he prayed he wouldn't need it. Clara sat cross-legged by the fire, playing with her rag doll. Why's the wind so mad, Pa? Just winter having its say, he answered, settling into his chair. Come here where it's warmer. It's warmer. She climbed into his lap, and he told her stories until she dozed off. Later, Tucking her into bed, he whispered a prayer for protection over her small form. Morning brought temporary peace. Sunlight sparkled on fresh snow, and the wind had settled to gentle sighs. Ilias taught Clara to knead bread dough, her tiny hands mimicking his larger ones. "Pat it down, just like that," he encouraged. Flour dusted her nose and cheeks as she concentrated. Soon the cabin filled with the warm scent of baking bread. "We did it!" Clara bounced on her toes when Ilias pulled the golden brown loaf from the oven. Her pride in their joint accomplishment made him laugh, a sound that surprised him with its ease. As dusk approached, Mary arrived for supper, stamping snow from her boots. They shared the fresh bread with beans and coffee, while Clara told Mary about her baking adventure. After Clara went to bed, they spoke in low voices about Rufus's scheme. "Judge Mackenzie has a reputation," Mary said grimly. "He ruled against 3 Cheyenne families last year in land disputes, all cases where mining companies wanted access." "Grant's coming early," Ilias replied, "but we need proof of the bribe." The bartender mentioned Rufus withdrew a large sum from the bank yesterday. Mary's dark eyes were thoughtful. "I could ask around carefully." "Be cautious," Ilias warned. "Rufus is desperate now. That makes him dangerous." They discussed possibilities until the fire burned low. When Mary rose to leave, Ilias insisted on walking her home. The night was bitter cold, their breath freezing in clouds before their faces. "I won't let him win," Ilias said as they walked. "Not when I know he'll just abandon her again." "We won't let him win," Mary corrected firmly. "Clara has a family now, one that chooses her, not one that sees her as property to sell." Ilias glanced at her, touched by the quiet strength in her voice. They walked on through the starlit cold, their steps crunching in sync, united in their determination to protect the child who had brought them together. The noon stage rattled into Pine Gulch right on schedule, snow spraying from its wheels. Harlan Grant stepped down, his leather briefcase clutched tight, and nodded grimly to Ilias, who waited with Clara by the general store. "Found some interesting documents in Denver," Grant said as they loaded his bags into Ilias's wagon. "Thinks about Clara's mother's land that Rufus doesn't want known." The ride to the cabin was quiet, except for Clara's soft humming. Fresh snow blanketed the trail, pristine except for rabbit tracks that zigzagged between the pines. Inside, Mary had a pot of coffee waiting, steam curling from the spout. While the men settled at the rough-hewn table, Clara sprawled on her belly near the hearth, paper and charcoal in hand. Her small tongue poked out in concentration as she, "Drew, look, Pa!" She held up a drawing. "That's us on the big hill." Ilias smiled at the wobbly figures on a sled. "Fine work, sweetheart. Maybe you can draw Samson next?" Grant spread papers across the table, speaking low. Clara's mother owned nearly 200 acres of prime mining land. Rufus can't touch it while Clara's in your custody, but if he wins her back, he'll sell it right out from under her, Mary finished, setting cups before them. "Exactly." Grant tapped a yellow deed. "The land's worth thousands. No wonder he's trying to buy off Judge Mackenzie." Clara's humming mixed with the snap of burning pine logs as they planned their strategy. The afternoon light faded early, as it did in mountain winters, throwing their shadows long across the cabin floor. That night, after Clara was asleep, Ilias tossed in his bed. Dreams chased through his mind, Clara crying as strangers dragged her away, Rufus laughing as he counted gold coins, the cabin empty and cold without her small presence. He jerked awake, shirt damp with sweat despite the chill. The fire had burned low, casting weird shadows on the walls. Ilias rose quietly and checked on Clara. She slept peaceful as an angel, her rag doll clutched tight. The sight eased his racing heart, but sleep was long in returning. Morning brought heavy clouds and the promise of more snow. They hitched up the wagon early. Clara wrapped in extra blankets between Elias and Grant. Mary rode her own horse alongside, her dark braids frosted with ice crystals. The courthouse stood tall and stern against the gray sky. Inside, they found a crowd gathered, whispering and pointing at the notice tacked to the judge's door. Hearing postponed, judge indisposed. Indisposed? Grant's voice was sharp with suspicion. Judge Harrison was fine yesterday. The clerk shrugged, not meeting. Their eyes took sick sudden-like. Fever, they say. Mighty convenient timing, Mary murmured. Grant pulled Elias aside while Clara explored the courthouse's long benches. This smells wrong. Harrison's never missed court in 15 years. Watch your back, Rufus might try something while the law's delayed. Elias nodded grimly. How long you reckon the delay will be? Hard to say, a week, maybe 2. Grant gathered his papers. I'll telegraph my office, see what else we can dig up on Rufus meanwhile. The ride home was tense and silent. Dark clouds pressed low over the mountains, and the wind tarried the bite of coming snow. Clara dozed against Elias' chest, exhausted from the early morning and disappointment. Mary helped prepare a simple supper of beans and cornbread. Clara pushed her food around listlessly, unusual for her healthy appetite. What's troubling you, little one? Elias asked gently. Are they gonna make me go away? Her voice was small, scared. Elias's heart clenched. He pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. No one's taking you anywhere. Remember our plan for tomorrow? That big sled ride we talked about? She nodded, eyes brightening slightly. Well, that's still happening. Snow's perfect for it. He tapped her nose. And I reckon Samson might have an extra carrot for you to feed him after. Clara smiled at last, snuggling against him. Promise? Promise. Elias met Mary's worried gaze across the table, determination burning in his chest. They would find a way through this. They had to. After Clara was tucked in, he stood at the window watching snow begin to fall. The flakes danced in the lamplight. Beautiful but cold, like the fear trying to take root in his heart. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. For now, he had a sled ride to prepare for, and a little girl's joy to protect. The mountain night pressed cold against the cabin windows. Snow fell thick and silent, muffling all sound except the soft crackle of dying embers in the hearth. Elias slept fitfully, his dreams troubled by the day's worries about the delayed hearing. A sharp crack jolted him awake. The cabin door burst inward, snow and wind howling through the gap. 3 dark figures surged inside, their boots thundering on the wooden floor. Elias lunged for his rifle, but a heavy weight slammed him back. Rough hands pinned his arms, while another attacker struck him hard across the temple. Get the girl, a familiar voice ordered. Rufus. Clara's terrified scream pierced the chaos. Pa, pa! Elias fought through the stars bursting behind his eyes, struggling against the iron grip of Rufus's hired men. One was a huge fellow with a matted beard, the other lean and mean-looking with a knife scar across his chin. They held him down while Rufus wrapped Clara in her bedding, ignoring her kicks and cries. Consider this payment for crossing me, Rufus sneered, backing toward the door with Clara. By the time you find us, we'll be long gone, and that land will be mine to sell. The big man drove his knee into Elias's ribs, forcing the air from his lungs. When his vision cleared, the cabin door stood open to the storm, snow already drifting across the floor. Clara's screams had faded into the howling wind. Elias staggered to his feet, ribs screaming in protest. He yanked on his boots and heavy coat, grabbed his rifle and powder, and stumbled out into the blinding snow. But the kidnappers' tracks were already filling in, and the darkness was complete. He spent the rest of that terrible night pacing, waiting for first light, preparing supplies. The moment dawn's gray light touched the mountains, he was on their trail. The fresh snow had buried most signs, but here and there he found marks: a broken branch, a deep boot print sheltered by an overhang, a scrap of Clara's blanket caught on a thorny bush. The wind cut like knives through his coat as he pushed on. By midday, the clouds had cleared enough to reveal more promising signs. In a sheltered grove, he found the remains of a hasty camp: cold ashes, trampled snow, and clear prints leading northeast. "Hold on, Clara," he whispered, touching the small footprint of her wrapped foot. "I'm coming." The afternoon brought bitter cold and more snow squalls. Elias's legs burned from breaking trail through deep drifts, but he refused to slow. As the light began to fade, he caught a hint of wood smoke on the wind. Following it brought him to the old Springer Way station, abandoned since the stage line changed its route 2 years before. Elias approached carefully, rifle ready. A thin curl of smoke rose from the crooked chimney. Through gaps in the weathered boards, lamplight flickered. He crept closer, finding a wider crack to peer through. The station's single room was dimly lit by a small fire. Clara lay wrapped in blankets near the hearth, her face flushed with fever. She tossed restlessly, mumbling in her sleep. The sight of her illness made Elias's heart clench with fury. Rufus, sprawled in a corner, a bottle of whiskey fallen from his slack fingers. His 2 men sat at a rickety table, absorbed in a card game, a stack of coins between them. Their rifles leaned against the wall, just out of reach. "Raise you 2 bits," the scarred man said, tossing coins onto the pile. The bearded giant scratched his chin. "Reckon that fever's getting worse," he muttered, glancing at Clara. "Girl needs a doctor." "Shut up and play," his partner snapped. "Ain't our problem what Rufus does with her." Elias pulled back from his vantage point, mind racing. 3 armed men sighed, Clara sick and vulnerable by the fire. A frontal assault would put her at risk. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Clara's fever wouldn't wait. He circled the station slowly, studying every angle. The roof was partially collapsed on the far side, and a fallen beam had created a gap near the chimney. The back door's hinges were nearly rusted through. And the horses, he could hear them stamping in the lean-to-shelter around back. The wind moaned through the trees as Elias crouched in the deepening darkness, weighing his options. Clara's weak cough drifted through the walls, spurring his decision. He would wait 1 hour for full dark, then make his move. "Just hold on a little longer, sweetheart," he whispered into the gathering night. "Pa's here now." The pale light of dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered clearing in shades of pearl and gold. Elias stood tall before the weathered way station, his rifle left deliberately behind in the trees. His breath steamed in the frigid air as he called out, voice steady and clear. "Rufus, come out and face me like a man. No weapons, no violence, just words between us." The door creaked open slowly. Rufus stumbled onto the rickety porch, dark circles under his bloodshot eyes. His coat hung open, whiskey stains marking his shirt. Pride and bone-deep weariness warred across his face as he gripped the door frame for support. "I'm offering you mercy," Elias said quietly. "Sign away your rights to Clara, and I won't press charges for the kidnapping. Walk away clean, Rufus." The wind whispered through the pines as Rufus wavered, his shoulders finally slumping in defeat. "Got paper?" Elias pulled Grant's prepared document from his coat. Rufus scrawled his signature with trembling fingers, then turned away without a word, shame etched in every line of his body. Inside the station, Clara lay curled by the dying fire, her fever-flushed face lighting up at the sight of Elias. His hired men had fled during the night, leaving their coins scattered across the floor. Elias gathered Clara into his arms, wrapping her securely in a thick blanket. "I've got you now, sweetheart," he whispered, pressing his lips to her hot forehead. "You're safe." They rode slowly through the morning, Clara nestled against his chest. At Mary's cabin, she welcomed him with warm broth and gentle hands. Even as Mary tended her fever, Clara refused to release her grip on Elias's sleeve, falling into exhausted sleep, still clutching his coat. "Pa," she murmured, finally safe in his arms. "My pa." Spring's first warmth touched the mountain air as sunlight streamed through the chapel's weathered windows. Inside the small wooden church, flowers gathered from the thawing meadows adorned every surface. Elias Kane stood at the altar in his best coat, watching as Mary Two Rivers walked toward him, her dark eyes shining. Between them, Clara beamed in her new white dress, the beaded bracelet Mary had given her months ago catching. The light in her tiny wrist, Reverend Cole's gentle voice filled the hushed space. Today we witness how God's love creates families not just by blood, but by choice. Through trials and tribulations, these three souls found each other. Their story reminds us that redemption comes in many forms, and faith can build bridges between hearts. Mary and Elias exchanged simple gold rings, their hands steady and sure. Clara watched with wonder, her small fingers reaching up to touch both their joined hands. The congregation's amen echoed warmly through the chapel. Afterward, the townspeople gathered in the churchyard, sharing slices of fresh-baked pie and hot coffee. Even the sheriff offered congratulations, his earlier doubts replaced by genuine respect. Mary's friends from both the native and settler communities mingled freely, sharing stories and laughter as the sun painted the western sky in shades of rose and gold. The new family walked home together. Their joined hands swung gently as they followed the familiar trail, Clara skipping between them. Inside their lamplit cabin, Clara hurried to her small chest of treasures. She pulled out the wooden horse Elias had carved during those first uncertain days. "It's for our family now," she said softly, placing it in Elias' weathered palm. Through the window, they watched the season's final snow falling silently, each flake a blessing sealing their new life together. The wooden horse found its place on the mantel, a testament to love that builds families one careful piece at a time. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.